Vladimir Putin is visiting the United States. This, I think, is one of the more recent visits that he's had, or perhaps he hasn't been here in a very long time. I seem to recall that there have been meetings between Trump and Putin before, but perhaps that was Trump visiting him. Anyway, he's coming to Alaska, and Lucas, what's happening here is there's new normalized relationships that are brewing between the U.S. and Russia. Is the railroad getting reopened? What's really going on here?
I think, well, we'll talk about the railroad in a bit, but I was just thinking, I don't know that Putin has come to the United States since maybe the early or before the maybe since 2008, since the Obama administration. I'm not even sure that he came to the United States when uh, when George W. Bush, the younger Bush, was having talks with him. He said, "I looked into his eyes and I saw his soul." Um, we've had a long, frosty period with Russia leading into the conflict in Ukraine with the NATO expansion, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah,
this
I
is
mean
big.
they kept drawing lines in the sand, saying no NATO expansion, no NATO expansion. We just kept expanding NATO. I got a chance to check up on that Tucker Carlson interview that recently had, and he kind of laid out all the NATO expansion that happened. I'm not surprised that there's been a frosty relationship, especially given that that was Russia's pretty much one talking point is that they didn't want an expansion.
Well, and when the Soviet Union collapsed, they withdrew the Warsaw Pact, and they expected also that the defensive organization of NATO would also be withdrawn. But instead, it was both increased in reality, but also subversively. Larry Johnson has a great episode on YouTube on his channel Counter Currents. Larry Johnson is a former CIA intelligence officer. But he goes through the subversive sort of positioning of troops into the Ukraine and the movement of NATO troops further eastward, and also the the joint operations that were conducted with various countries down in the Balkans and then in the Ukraine. Um, that that we're not joining, allowing countries to join NATO, but working with them against some imagined enemy who was never to be named. Well, that was to be Russia. So Russia has given many warnings about it, and that has led to the conflict that we currently have in Ukraine. That Russia is winning. So now we are having we see Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin um, agreeing to a summit, and that summit is not to be held in some third party place, Istanbul. The latest being Istanbul. Before that, it was Minsk in Belarus. Um, I'm not sure. Well, I'm not sure where they were before then. Putin did go to the was still going to the the security conference in Germany up until this special military operation in Ukraine. But long story short, we are about to see something very significant, and that when I can only imagine that Putin is coming to the United States not just to have a conversation about the end of the conflict in Ukraine, but also part of the reason for the choice of Alaska, the choice of coming to the United States, and to a former Russian territory, is to announce a new path forward and a new relationship with Russia, or with Russia and the United States. So I I I I think that's what we are going to see there, and we have we have also
Well,
seen.
notably absent is Zelensky, the non-recognized leader of the Ukraine. Right, Putin doesn't recognize his validity since there weren't elections, and so his being excluded from this summit is pretty momentous.
Well, and I mean, I don't know if you know this, but Zelensky was not invited and not announced to be part of the summit. And then at some point, Trump said, "Well, we're bringing Zelensky along too, to be waiting in the wings." Um, I don't know how planned out that announcement was. I don't know that he will be invited to sit at the table. I know that the Russians won't speak to him. We also saw 2 weeks ago that Britain trotted out Zelensky, and Zelensky is sort of positioning him as a replacement, the NATO replacement to a new leader in Ukraine, seeing the writing on the wall with the inexorable Russian advance, that their threats for putting boots on the ground or ratcheting up their um, the weapons that they're doling out, that they supposedly bought from the United States, sending those to Ukraine was not going to actually happen. So they begin to consider other options. It seems that Zelensky has become persona non grata with not just Russia, but also with NATO. So it'll be interesting to see how much he figures into this negotiation. Um, that that a puppet leader in a proxy war has pretended to have any say in the negotiation, that that was the premise of the Istanbul talks, that the Istanbul 1 and 2 talks, that found no resolution to the conflict. So I'm glad to see Trump wiping away that facade and calling Putin over to the United States. And again, I think,
And there was no renewed funding for the Ukraine war in the big beautiful bill or anything that's passed recently. So it's not like there's a new tranche of money coming their way. Or they did something with dumping those old weapons on them, right?
um, yes. Well, and remember, with the agreement that they made with NATO, they were going to sell weapons to NATO, ostensibly for NATO to send to the Ukraine for reinforcing their NATO or Europe's fight with Russia. But that has been collapsing at every side. So I'm not sure that we were ever going to see those weapons sent, or NATO even come up with the money. So that seemed to me to be a politicians buying time, from pressure from both their constituency, but more importantly, from uh, the the financial military war machine that was demanding perpetuation.
Well, and Ukraine is like functionally dependent upon the U.S. unless NATO steps in, and so the longer this draws out, Russia is not dependent on anybody else to make decisions. So, I mean,
Well, and NATO is dependent on the United States. Still comes back to the United States. But then, if we take a look back at reality and look at the United States' ability to produce more weapons, and especially the missiles that are being used to fight wars that we don't really care about, that we're not going to send troops and make an all-out effort for, well, the production of those weapons relies on a relies on a supply chain that comes directly from China. And since December last year, China has not been selling rare earth metals that are necessary for these missiles, these bombs, so we are out. Well, I'll put it this way: our limited capacity to produce these weapons, we do so at a very slow pace compared to Russia, is hampered even more. So whether the Pentagon wants to continue this war or not, they have to be making real decisions about concerns for having the ability to defend the United States, or to continue to waste weapons in Ukraine and the Middle East. And I think that's sort of the reality on the ground that has led to this agreement with Russia. And we've also, the Trump has been very interested in pulling out of NATO since his first term. He ruffled a lot of feathers in his first term. He's not been so blunt about leaving NATO, and instead has been giving maxims and ultimatums for the relationship with NATO to continue during his second term. And the agreements that NATO and Europe have agreed to have have been demeaning to Europe, and also are probably unrealizable for Europe to come up with the money from their side of the deal. So and we also know that Donald Trump has maintained conversations with Vladimir Putin, the long telephone calls that he's had, even as the intelligence agencies, the sort of the miasma of the British intelligence agency, and probably involvement of the United States intelligence agency has launched both assassination attempts on Vladimir Putin and made attacks towards their nuclear arsenal. But through all of this, not only has Trump maintained conversations with Russia, but Vladimir Putin also has maintained that communication too. So and I think this speaks to an understanding and a long play by Russia that that patience and maintaining dialogue with the United States would leave open a window for the United States to turn away from their relationship with Europe, to let NATO die, and to forge a new path forward. And I think this is, again, why we are seeing this occur in Alaska. There's very real there's real considerations with regards to the ICC warrants, International Criminal Court of the United Nations warrants out for Vladimir Putin that traveling through Europe or other hostile countries to come to a third party site, Istanbul or Minsk or wherever that might be, it could have been problematic. But I think that there is a greater consideration, and again, that is a new path forward with the United States. Now, why Russia? The United States bought Russia from the Soviet Union, bought Alaska from Russia before it was the Soviet Union, on the heels of the Civil War, and that had been a discussion that had been occurring since the 1850s. The Whig Party that were in alliance with the brand new radical Republicans leading into the Civil War. They're designed for defeating the South and because we also have to, when we go back to the Civil War, we like to think of it in terms of internal conflict and a conflict over slavery here in the United States. But on a broader stage, the cotton trade from the South was part of Britain's imperial economical system, and so Britain was supporting the South. They love to say that they were against slavery, but however, they more so than against slavery, they were for the cotton trade, and so they were working against Lincoln and the Union because they did not want to see their cheap cotton trade collapse, and so part of the calculation that the Whigs put forth, instead of addressing the slavery, the issue of slavery head on, was to let's create a large amount of debt. Let's purchase a bunch of land from Russia, and that will then we can raise the tariff against cotton, and that will suppress the cotton trade, and that will take us away from the relationship with the British Empire that seems to be creeping back into the United States, despite the wars that we have fought for independence from the British imperial system. Didn't turn out that way. Instead, we raised a income tax instead of a tariff on cotton. But that's part of how Russia or Alaska came into the hands of the United States. Now, we should also go back and look at the reasoning that was put forth by the Russians. And one, we should also remember that Russia freed their serfs the day before Lincoln took office for his first term. So prior to the Civil War in the United States, and certainly prior to the emancipation of slaves in the United States, Russia had already done so. And they also said this reliance on cheap labor, this is a feudal arrangement, and the only way that it leads forward is to imperialism. And we don't want to be like Europe with this feudal imperialism. We would rather see sovereignty and get away from these notions of free trade and globalism. So we don't want to play that game. And so rather than recreate the Crimean War that we just got done fighting with Britain in Africa, we are going to sell the lands of the Russian holding in the New World, and we will sell them to somebody who will be aligned to us in the future. So I think that we also have to remember that Trump, whenever he took office, invoked the images of McKinley. And I thought that there was calculation with regards to that. And here we see a turn of focus to Alaska, and Mount McKinley is not the sole reason that was invoked. McKinley also, after the Civil War, fought this American alliance with the British imperial system and the free trade, the free trade arrangement of the global free trade path that the United States had taken coming out of the Civil War. So I think that has a lot. I think we are going to see a return to this relationship with Russia that we have so constantly focused on coming out of World War I and World War II as Russia as our great enemy. And that has not always been the case.
So with this return to normalized relationship with Russia, because definitely from a historical perspective, we've had a substantially better relationship with Russia. Does this put us at odds with NATO? Is this part of the withdrawal from NATO? Is that Trump's desire to normalize relationship with Russia and drawing back from NATO? This is a realignment on the geopolitical world stage.
I think NATO collapses, and again, the last, Trump recently
go back to collapses. What does that look like functionally if NATO collapses? Is this where we would see other nations withdrawing, or just that they're completely ineffective because the United States was providing the lion's share of the funding?
NATO has been, on one hand, we talk about NATO. On one hand, we talk about the European Union.
Well, one of the perspectives that I've heard on NATO is that it prevents the European countries from fighting amongst themselves, that this alliance keeps them from internal bickering, internal conflicts. So if that collapses, do we see wars breaking out in Europe between member nations of the EU? That seems unlikely.
I don't think so. If we do so, they will be local fights. No, I think the NATO is a perpetuation of misguided notions wrought on Europe by Woodrow Wilson and by later administrations, especially the Truman administration through the Marshall Plan, that have yoked political change in Europe to free trade, and in doing so, put the entirety of Europe under the British imperial system. Even though, going back to FDR, that was the that was part of one of FDR's administration's chief reasons for joining World War II was to defeat the British and the French empires. So, what does that look like going forward? I think that we will see um, a return to sovereignty. Now, part of the story of the collapse of NATO, we need to go back to Brexit, and what a surprise that Brexit was to the political class in Europe, the political order in Europe, and a lot of the fallout that we've seen in the Biden administration, the censorship throughout the world, a ratcheting up of chaos in the colonial enterprises around the world, and I'm especially thinking about West Asia and South Asia and Africa, has come because the those in power in Europe who thought that that Europe was unassailable and that everyone would that Europe was unassailable, realized that in the wake of Brexit there were going to be more countries that were leaving. So I think that we will see almost immediately an Italy exit. Italy is already making moves to leave. I think we'll see just well, the European system will collapse. The euro will collapse. There will be a return to the state currencies of the various countries, and this notion of free trade will collapse. Now, I don't know if that holds true with the Schengen Agreement, the ability for people to move about and work in various European countries, but they also have the immigration crisis that's coming from Africa and from West Asia, or from Asia more broadly. So I would imagine that we also see a mirroring of the nationalism that we've seen in the United States begin to occur in Europe, and we've seen that with the Marine Le Pen candidacy in France. We've seen that with the AfD in Germany. We've seen that in Romania, in Hungary. So we will continue to see nationalism rise in Europe. But in one hand, when we think about nationalism, we put it in the context of World War II. But again, to go back and break this notion of the enemies and who's on whose side that we have accepted for so long post World War II, if we begin to break down or to think about the soft power of imperialism that the world was dealing with leading into both World War I and World War II, and a sovereignty as an antidote to the interference of globalist notions or imperial notions. Globalist is just a euphemism for imperial, by the way. That's just a liberal euphemism for imperial. So these imperialist notions that we have so long accepted coming out of World War I and World War II, they are coming to the fore again. So I hope that we do not answer the rise of nationalism with another world war, and I think this is what Trump has understood. More so in his second, or I think he understood it in his first term, but made the mistake of trying to address it head on when there are imperialist or neoconservative, as we like to call them, or the uniparty that exists inside the United States. He thought that he could address that head on. He did not understand the extensive network and the political power that exists throughout the countries of the world. And so this time he has took the WWE or the Hulk Hogan approach to to addressing this relationship with imperialism that exists in the United
Okay, now
States and
you
the
caught
world.
my attention. Hulk Hogan, worldwide wrestling entertainment. What do you mean by that?
Well, Trump. I mean, look at how Trump came to. Look at how Trump brought us to a restart with North Korea. There was a lot of bluster. There was a lot of words that were exchanged, and the prim and proper political class ate it all up. They said, "Ooh, there's going to be a big fight, and we make money on fights." And not only will there be a fight, but the globalist network or the imperial network of the world is much stronger, and so we need to start thinking about how we're going to carve up North Korea. And meanwhile, Trump was dealing in secret with North Korea to say, that's a lot of calling you a rocket man is a line that I'm feeding to the neoconservative NATO imperial globalist crowd of the world. But really, I respect your sovereignty. And I want to come to an agreement in which your sovereignty is respected and the United States sovereignty is respected. And in his new term, we have seen him take that tactic with Russia, I mean, look at the nuclear subs that he just sent to Russia, and the timelines that he's given for with all of these countries for their tariff deals, even the embrace of tariffs. The imperial system operates on free trade. Like, that's something that we need to understand, because economists who are wringing their hands and screaming out loud about this can't imagine a world that exists without free trade. And this is because this is the unwitting uh, priors that have been built into their philosophy. I mean, well, even look at when did Adam Smith publish? When did Adam Smith publish? I can't think. The Wealth of Nations, 1776. And Adam Smith, a Scotsman, from prior conquered colonial project of Scotland, trying to imagine how countries that were taken under the imperial reign could participate and get ahead, how people who were caught in that system could get ahead. So I'm going off the rails here, but Donald Trump has not been seduced by the promise of free trade, by the promise of globalism or imperialism, as it was the true name to the reality of that system. And he's wanted to remove the United States from that system. So he has engaged in this sort of WWE bluster, and then the scripted fight that's not a real fight. So that who's the loser? The fans. Who is the dupe, I should say, but the fans that believe the bluster. So it's just like wrestling. Wrestling isn't fake, it's scripted. And that's a line from Hulk Hogan himself. And that is how Trump has taken on the imperial apparatus that spans so many various countries. And those who've wanted to believe it have believed it. They have a dawning realization that Donald Trump's actions are different than his words. I don't know what their reactions are going to be as they understand it. I think some did understand it prior to and realized how focused Trump was on removing the United States from the imperial system. And this is why we saw 3 assassination attempts on Trump going into his second in his second presidential campaign. I think this is also we begin to understand the depth of the lawfare that was wrought against him. And part of this also, this imperial system is one of shipping. If and is a shipping network, going back to the cotton trade, to the tobacco trade, to the opium trade. What did it all have in common? It goes back to shipping things around the world. So, and Russia and China have understood that nature about it. They're not going to go fight Britain or the United States on the seas of the world. They have said, let's return to antiquity. What do we have that Europe doesn't have? We have massive tracts of land that span the breadth of the world. We have Asia, and we have railroads. Why do we put everything on boats and send them out across the seas so that financiers can make bets as to whether those boats reach their destination and what the prices of those goods will be when they get there? No, let's have a much more stable system that operates on railroads. And again, I think that's why Alaska is going to be so very important. The Silk Roads are being reconstructed, spanning Asia by the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, the North-South corridor through Russia. And if you believe that the world is round, you'll begin to notice that the United States is not as isolated as it seems, and that Alaska is only 20 miles, 50 miles from the Asian continent. So why we have not been engaging in trade by putting the goods that we're selling from Asia to North America on railroads that go to the Bering Strait is a question we should be thinking about. And I think that we are going to see trade networks that are built on railroads and maybe some sort of tunnel underneath the Bering Strait, or ferries that take those that take what is brought by railroads to Alaska, back and forth. I think that's what we're going to see.
And this is part of all the signaling that Trump did early in his term that nobody, I don't think, really understood when he was talking about Greenland and Canada and now Alaska. His focus definitely seems to be on the solidification of North American trade routes, shifting of that corridor.
Well, and also Canada. I mean, part of the bluster of the 51st state and Greenland too is not as a threat to the citizens of those countries, but rifling their rifling their relationship with the imperial system. So to begin to unsettle Canadians, and also what was one of the responses of the new prime minister, the prime minister who is a former banker, central banker for the central bank system of the imperial system. What was one of his political statements? Oh, let's have King Charles come and address the nation to reassure Canada that they are part of the global system, and that their lives will continue to be improved by the supply of cheap goods that are produced around the world. Well, the other half of the story that's not told, that Donald Trump is well aware of, is those cheap goods that are supplied both rely on a shipping network, but also rely on an abuse of the price of resources or the price of labor from some other country around the world. And that's not fair to the world. So Donald Trump was forcing Canada into realizing those ties, that their sovereignty is not actual, that their independence from the British imperial system is one great mirage, so that he can begin to spur political change in Canada, but also in Greenland. makes no sense to me why Greenland should be super happy to be under the political direction of a tiny country from Europe, Denmark, and as they begin to think about what good does being a political vassal to a tiny country in Europe, what does that bring us, and what possibility do we have with better relationships with our neighbors? Donald Trump was,
they're not technically part of the EU. They're what that overseas protectorate or whatever that means for being a vassal state.
yeah, a second-class citizen.
Second-class citizen to the EU, but I believe there was some polling that was done in Greenland, and they seem to like the arrangement. So if you were to ask the populace, it seems that they're still somewhat in favor of maintaining this relationship, but at least the door has been kicked open, and the conversation is now happening in a more substantive way. It probably wouldn't have if Donald Trump hadn't made the statements he did about Greenland.
Well, as we also grapple with the censorship the censorship and the media narratives that have spun so far awry from reality post Brexit in the United States and in Europe, we can also begin to look at Greenland and Canada and say, oh, this manufactured consent that Noam Chomsky speak of is much deeper, and it goes to an imperial control of the narratives about the relationships of countries that exist in the world, even in the United States. Russia is our enemy, Britain is our friend, globalism is the answer. We've been spoon-fed that narrative, and political dissent has been quashed for generations. So if we want to end that, Trump understands that the answer is not Afghanistan. The answer is not Iraq, which is to stage a political coup. The answer is not Iran in the 1950s coups in Iran or coups in all of these countries and setting up puppet governments. The answer is to start a political conversation in those countries, and that's what he does really well. And again, that goes to his WWE bluster, and then a scripted calculation of what a conflict is going to look like, and what sort of internal power struggle is going to occur, and I think ultimately the ace card that he holds to his chest and that he plays is the one truth that he says is, after the scripted fight, you retain your sovereignty. And I think that's something that is going to be compelling for all of the players that enter the ring. So,
well, we'll keep a close eye on the summit that's happening in Alaska. Sounds like it's going to happen this Friday. We'll keep a watch on it, and as there's some results from it, we'll definitely have a follow-on discussion. But I think that's all we've got for FOMO, unless you had any last thoughts.
Nope, that's all I got.
All right, we'll see you next time on FOMO.